2 million people killed in the span of a few days. The advanced technology that we have today, without all of that, they were able to make those calculations. They would grow up in luxurious households. They were given everything they wanted. When they became the king or the queen, where's the experience? The Mongols came and they destroyed the Muslim world. The Hungarians and the Austrians, they were making an alliance. Sultan Selim I, he's no person to just sit by and say, oh, you're trying to meddle in my empire. Keep doing it, it's fine. So Sultan Suleiman I realizes there's problems in my eastern border. So he marches out with an army. To conquer Europe, you need access to a river called the Danube.
إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salamu ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. The topic of today's lecture is to talk about the life of one of the greatest men to ever walk on the face of this earth. Not just one of the greatest Muslim men, one of the most powerful Muslim men, but generally throughout history, one of the most powerful men to ever walk on the face of this earth. A man who ruled over 3 different continents, one throne, one empire, one sultan, ruling over 3 different continents of the world. He was a man who brought back the golden age of Islam. If you remember the days in Baghdad that we spoke about briefly before, where the Muslims were making these, they were the pioneers at the forefront of the scientific and technological advancements that were being made. They used to make calculations there. They would try and calculate the size of the earth back in those days in the 800s, the 9th century. And they were so close to the correct calculations that we have today. That was without the technology and the advanced technology that we have today. Without all of that, they were able to make those calculations. And then obviously the Mongols came and they destroyed the Muslim world. And there was no hope for a long time. But this man, he brought back that golden age in the Muslim world. He took Islam to lands that, 500-600 years before his birth, even Muslims didn't even think that Islam would rule over such far and distant lands. Who is this man that we are speaking about? He is the 10th Ottoman Sultan, Sultan Suleiman I, or in the West as they know him as Suleiman the Magnificent, and as the Muslims know him as Suleiman Qanuni, Suleiman the Lawgiver. And we'll speak a bit more about why was he known as the lawgiver. What does that mean? Why was he given that title? But before we start and actually look into his life, to try and truly appreciate what he achieved, the fact that he was able to rule over these 3 different continents for 46 years, no easy job, right? But the fact to be able to appreciate how he was able to do that, I've tried to understand a little bit about the context that he was living in. And we spoke in a lot of detail in the previous lessons and in some of the early episodes about who the Ottomans were and how they got to where they were. Now, obviously, I would recommend that you go back to those lessons and try and watch those just to understand in detail who they were. But just to very briefly recap how the Ottomans came about. We know that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his mission starts in 610 CE in Mecca. And that was when he was 40 years old. And 13 years later, after being persecuted in Mecca, he flees. He does hijrah. He migrates to the city of Medina. And there they have a battle. The Battle of Khandaq, the Battle of the Trench, where the Muslims are being besieged. And in that, he gives them a prophecy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them good news of a prophecy that they will conquer Syria, they will conquer Yemen, and they will conquer Persia. These 3, you have to think about it. It's like today, maybe, Bangladesh, for example, somebody telling them, one day you're going to fight against Russia and you're going to fight against America and you're going to defeat both of them. Who would believe that? But that's exactly what happened. You Muslims who are on the brink of starvation, on the brink of extinction, there's a famine in Medina and they're digging a trench, a hole around Medina just to survive the 10,000 strong army that is about to attack Medina. In that moment, they receive good news that they will conquer these far and distant lands. And in that spirit, the successors of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, they go out on these distant campaigns, they send the Muslim armies far and wide. And within 10-15 years after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passes away, the Muslims have conquered all these different lands. And then after they pass away, the Rashidun Khilafah, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, and Hassan radiallahu ta'ala anhum, after their demise, after their passing, the Umayyads take over and they continue to expand Islam all the way into southern France. And now imagine the Muslim world, a small group of Muslims in Medina, now were able to expand. And how large was their empire? They were ruling from southern France all the way to Central Asia, into India. This is how far the Muslims had expanded. And then the Umayyads, they continue this. They even sieged Constantinople for the first time, the first Muslim navy. And after the Umayyads, they are toppled by the Abbasis. The Abbasis, they have a different focus. Their focus is now, yes, we're ruling over all these different lands, but now our focus is consolidation, is to develop strong systems of governance, and to also make sure that now they have a different focus. Now it's about intellectual advancements, trying to see, the scientific advancements, technological advancements that happen in Baghdad. Like we spoke about these, calculations about the size of the earth and all the other sort of advancements they had made. But then in that moment of, this hype, slowly, things start to go south, things start to go bad for the Muslims. And it is in that moment that this moment of infighting and civil war, that the Crusaders come, the Mongols come, and they destroy the Muslim world. But in the same day, in that same time when the city of Baghdad was being sacked, 2 million people killed in the span of a few days by the Mongols. People were digging graves. They would bury themselves alive inside a grave just to try and hide from the Mongols. A Mongol would come inside a house. A Mongol woman would come inside a house. She would see a family of Muslims. They would say, "Don't you dare move." She would go get her sword and then she would come and kill these Muslims. That's how much fear they had. But in that moment, in that same year, 1258, when Baghdad was sacked, the Muslims, Allah plants the seeds of revival in the Muslim world. A man is born in Western Anatolia, parts of Turkey today, and his name was Osman I. And he had a dream. A tree grew out of his chest and its branches covered the entire world. And he asked his teacher, "What is this dream I saw?" His teacher told him that this means that you and your descendants will be given custodianship, will be given sultanate and authority over the different parts of the world. And this branch shows that you will cover the earth with justice. You will be a shade for all oppressed people around the world. And it's in that spirit that Sultan Osman I, he goes on these distant military campaigns and he conquers different cities and establishes the Ottoman Empire. And so he and his descendants, they go on to conquer all these different provinces, and the Ottoman Empire grows and grows. And it gets to a point where we get to the life of Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih in the mid-15th century. And this is where there's a huge turning point. And really, obviously, the past two lessons were about his life. But you need to understand, if you want to appreciate the life of Sultan Suleiman I, you need to understand the life of Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih. Now, it's at that point during his life in the mid-15th century where the Ottomans, they'd conquered all these lands, but they were still behaving like, a beylik, a small Turkish principality. They weren't acting like an empire. But it was during his life that he makes all these reforms, legal reforms, military reforms, reforms in governance and administration, that now the Ottomans truly become an empire. He was planning for 200, 300, 400, 500 years in advance. In his life, he knows 50, 60 years, he can't conquer the world, but he knows his descendants can. And so that's what he does. With that in mind, he establishes all these legal reforms and military reforms that allow the Ottoman Empire to develop into a proper empire. And then his son, Sultan Bayezid II, he doesn't really go on many military campaigns. He focuses on consolidation. There's some problems with Europe that prevent him from going on many military campaigns. So he focuses on consolidation. All these territories that his father has conquered, let me continue to ensure that Ottoman rule is very, very strong there. And let me, make more legal reforms, ensure that the economy is strong. And so when he passes away, Sultan Bayezid I in 1512, when his son Sultan Selim I takes over, in 8 years, Sultan Selim I, one of the rules for one of the shortest periods, only 8 years, one of the shortest reigning sultans. But in that period, he doubles the size of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, for the first time, goes on to conquer parts of Central Asia, and for the first time crosses into North Africa and takes over Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, all these different regions in North Africa. And only in 8 years, he doubles the size of the Ottoman Empire. And it's Sultan Selim I's son who is Sultan Suleiman I. And so now we understand who the Ottomans were and what we mean by this man was ruling over 3 different continents. Right? Now, before we look at Sultan Suleiman I and how he ascended to the Ottoman throne, one thing we need to try and understand is his youth, his childhood. Sultan Suleiman I, just like any other, Shahzadi, any other Ottoman prince, he was given, if you're, part of the Ottoman royal household, you are given an education of the highest caliber, highest level of education. The top scholars of the Muslim world, of the Ottoman Empire, not just Islamic scholars, but scholars of governance, scholars of military strategy, all these different fields. All of them come together and they teach the Ottoman prince about how to be a proper sultan that will go and rule the Ottoman Empire for many, many decades. And that's what he had access to. And alongside with that, when he reached 12, 13, 14 years old, as he became older, a teenager, he was sent to a distant province. And just like every Ottoman prince is, why would they be sent there at a young age? Why are they separated from their family and go and sent there? The idea is that they will be trained to rule over another Ottoman province, another castle, something like that, so that they know they have experience in ruling over different people. They have political experience, they have military experience, they can go on their own campaigns. So the whole idea of them being sent away to go and govern a distant province so that they can gain experience, so that when they become the sultan, they have experience already. Unlike, the princes living in Europe, they didn't get this experience. They weren't sent away to go and rule, apart from a few, they weren't sent away to go and rule over these distant provinces. They would grow up in luxurious households. They were given everything they wanted. When they became the king or the queen, where's the experience? But the Ottomans, they were given that experience from a young age. And so in 1520, Sultan Suleiman I, he hears about the death of his father and he rides to Constantinople, to Istanbul, and he sits on the Ottoman throne and he becomes the 10th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. But now, he begins his reign. Every Ottoman Sultan, when they start their reign, they have this inaugural campaign they go on, the first military campaign that they go on. Why was this? What was the point of this first inaugural military campaign? The idea was that they had to prove themselves worthy of the throne. And especially Sultan Suleiman I, he had to prove himself worthy of the throne more than perhaps any other Ottoman Sultan. The reason was because usually what would happen is the Ottoman Sultans, they would have more than one son. They'd have maybe 2, 3, 4 sons. And after they would pass away, it was about who could prove that they were worthy of the throne. They had to fight against each other, and whoever won, it shows that they were worthy of the throne. But Sultan Suleiman I, he didn't have any brothers. There was no one for him to show that, I am the one that's chosen because I am more suited to rule than my brothers. He was the only one that was there. So he became Sultan merely just because of the fact that he was Sultan Selim I's father. So he had a lot to prove. And the other reason is you have to also, if you go on a military campaign, you're successful, you'll prove to your ministers, you'll earn their trust. They'll see that, this person that's on their throne, they're just like their father. They're as great as their father. We have no reason to doubt the fact that they can rule over the empire and rule over all these distant lands and go on all these military campaigns. So that was the reason. So Sultan Suleiman I ascends the throne, 26-year-old boy, and because, compared to the people before him, they were much older. And the ministers he's surrounded with are much, much older. So he's very young compared to everyone else. And he ascends this throne, and now he has power over 3 different continents. So he has to prove that he is worthy of this throne, of his father's throne, a father who had doubled the size of the Ottoman Empire. So he begins planning his inaugural military campaign. Where is it that he wants to go? He realizes, he looks at the map of his empire, and he sees that the east is okay. The eastern provinces of my empire, they're secure. There's no need for me to go on a campaign in the east. My father's dealt with the east because his father, Sultan Selim I, he didn't go and fight against Europe. He fought in Asia against the Shias, and he fought against treacherous Sunni Muslims in North Africa. That was what he did. But Sultan Suleiman I, he sees that there's no reason for me to go there. The scores are settled. The dust is settled there. There's no need. So where does he focus on? He wants to finish his great-grandfather, what he started, Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih. He wants to go and conquer Europe, Central Europe. But to do that, there's certain things that need to be done. But before he does that, he realizes there's still one more thing I need to do. Before I can go and conquer Central Europe and continue where my great-grandfather left off, there's still one thing for him to do. And that is secure control over the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. See, Ottomans, right next to them, the sea was the Mediterranean Sea. This is a really, really important strategic area of the empire that they have control over. See, what happens if you control the Mediterranean Sea, then next to the Mediterranean Sea, all the trade is there, right? You can trade with Asia and you can trade with Africa. At the same time, if you want to go and trade with Asia, you go through the Mediterranean Sea and through the Suez Canal, which is today. If you can, you open a map up and you can see where the Suez Canal is today. So you can take a shortcut to go to Asia and trade with them. The Ottomans, they had control over this shortcut near the Mediterranean Sea. So that's why they wanted to control over that, to make sure that they have access to this shortcut to Asia. And what happened there, in the middle of the Mediterranean, the eastern Mediterranean, there was an island called Rhodes, or the Ottomans will call it Rhodos. And here, who was this being ruled over by? Christians, Christian knights, the Templar Knights. And these Templar Knights, they would go and they would raid any Muslim ships that were in the area, Muslim pilgrims that were going to perform Hajj or Umrah by sea, they would raid these ships. So the Ottomans realized we need to take care of them. We need to make sure this is secure. So in 1522, Sultan Suleiman I, he sends messengers to Rhodes and tells them, look, he gives them the option, stop what you're doing, accept Islam or pay the jizya or we will conquer you. And obviously these knights, they're not going to accept any of that. They're ready to fight. So, but really, these messengers that he sent, they weren't ordinary messengers. The sources indicate that they were most likely spies. Their job was that they would go and they would try and assess what the situation was like in Rhodes. What's happening in the court, the royal court in Rhodes? What's happening? Are the ministers and the knights, are they happy or are they angry? Are they fighting with each other? Is there anything we can exploit? Go and look at the walls. What are the strength of the walls? Are they strong? Can we easily break them down? What is life like for the soldiers? What are the people like? That was their job really, because they know those knights are never going to accept the peace offer. As is customary, they offered the peace, but they knew they're not going to accept, and the main reason was to go and assess the defense of Rhodes. How strong is it? And so they find out, they report back to Sultan Suleiman I, and in 1522, he marches out of Constantinople, sails to the island of Rhodes, and very easily he captures Rhodes and establishes Islam there. Now with that secure, he gets ready to conquer Europe. But look at the time, 1520 he takes the throne. Most Ottoman sultans or even rulers, if they want to prove themselves, to be very quick. They'd want to go very quickly and try and prove themselves. But in 1520 he takes the throne. When does he march out to conquer Europe? In 1526. 6 years he waits. Strategic planning. And that's one of the main lessons that we can take from his life. That if you want to do something, you need to plan for it well. Be patient. Sometimes we get very motivated and we want to do everything straight away. And then we end up doing nothing straight away. And that's one key lesson you take from his life, that whatever you want to do, if you want to achieve it properly and get it done properly, then because that's an Islamic principle, that whatever we do it properly to the best of our ability. But if you want to do that, it takes time. Just like that, he spent 6 years planning for his conquest of Europe. And so what does he do? Finally, all this time, from 1520 to 1526, he plans. He builds up the army, cannons, siege engines, the soldiers. He gives them the most advanced technology of the time. Until in 1526, he finally marches out towards which area? Hungary. Why Hungary? Because to conquer Europe, you need access to a river called the Danube. That makes sure that you have access to water, because he's going to be very far away from Constantinople, his capital. So he wants access to the Danube. You can sail your ships up the Danube, you can have access to water, all these things. But to take the Danube, you need, on the banks of the river Danube, right by the river Danube, there's a fortress called Belgrade. Right now, today, we have obviously the city of Belgrade in Hungary. But in that day, it was just a fortress. To take Europe, you need to take the Danube. To take the Danube, you need to take Belgrade. So that was his you can say his goal. And so he marches out to conquer Belgrade first. But why was it Hungary that he chose? So I just want to explain that as well. Why did he choose to go and conquer Hungary? Why not, another country in Europe? See, Hungary was the gateway into Europe. You conquer Hungary, you can go on to conquer the rest of Europe. So he was very strategic about it. It's not like, let me just go and conquer any country. No. What we do has to have a purpose, has to have a reason. And so that was why he wanted to conquer Hungary. It was the gateway into Europe. Another reason why Hungary was because the king of Hungary, he was making an alliance with Austria. Who was Austria? Hungary was very weak. Hungary wasn't really a threat to the Ottomans by then. Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih had already weakened Hungary, so they weren't really a massive threat. The big threat was Austria. They were like the rival. Like today we have the main rivals in the world, right? America's biggest rival is maybe Russia, China, the other way around, right? So that was how it was. The biggest rival to the Ottomans were the Austrians, the Christians in Austria. And what happened there was the Hungarians and the Austrians, they were making an alliance. And they would march on the Ottoman Empire. So as soon as Sultan Suleiman I heard about these reports, before they could materialize, before they could get their army together and attack the Ottomans, he marches out. He goes on to, gets his army ready and he marches out to deal with this new king of Hungary that's making this alliance. stop the alliance in its roots, and make sure it doesn't materialize and threaten the Ottoman Empire. And so in 1526, he marches out to go and conquer Hungary. They say that the army was so large that it would take an entire day. If you were to walk from the front of the army to the back of the army when they were marching in a straight line, it would take you an entire day to do that. That's how big his army was that marched out of Hungary. And the most, powerful cannons of the time, expert sappers and siege soldiers, one of the most powerful armies the Ottomans, perhaps the most powerful army the Ottomans ever gather up until that point in 1526. So they arrive at Hungary, this place called Mohacs, and this is the name of the Battle of Mohacs that takes place here. Now, what happened is the Ottomans, the Ottomans, they rule over both Europe and Asia, right? And that was one important thing. The Ottomans, they had a European side and they had an Asian side. So usually the army would be split into two. The Rumelian side, that's what the name of the European side, the Rumelian side, the Rumelian wing, and the Anatolian wing, which is the side from Asia. What happened is one side arrives first. Most likely it's the Rumelian side. They arrive first at the Battle of Mohacs. Hungarians got there first though. They're waiting, they're ready for the Ottomans because obviously it's much closer to them, right? So the Hungarians are there waiting, and one half of the Ottoman army arrives. And as soon as this half of the Ottoman army arrives, led by Sultan Suleiman himself, the Hungarians, they attack. They don't give time. As soon as they arrive, they attack. And now the Ottoman army is thrown into disarray. They weren't ready for the attack. They were still waiting for the other half of the army to arrive. And things get so bad for the Ottomans that an arrow actually is shot at Sultan Suleiman and deflects off his armor. So Sultan is nearly killed in the battle. That's how bad the situation gets. And obviously the Ottomans, they managed to just about hold on until the other half of the army arrives. And when the other half of the army arrives, they prove too much for the Hungarians. And remember, the Ottomans are a very, very well-coordinated, well-organized army. They were a professional standing army. Historians say that perhaps one of the greatest armies to ever walk and the most skilled armies to ever walk on the face of this earth was a special part of the Ottoman army called the Janissaries. They were boys that were taken from the Balkans, from Christian families. They were taken into the service of the Ottomans, and they were raised up either to become work in the administration, the government of the Ottoman Empire, or they were trained to fight in this army called the Janissaries. And so they were really, really powerful. They were the Sultan's, personal army, you can say. And so they were just too much for the Hungarians, and they end up defeating the Hungarians. And the Hungarians, they tried to run away. They tried to cross the river and run away, but most of them drowned, including King Louis himself, the king of Hungary. He drowns and he dies at the battlefield. And now Hungary is there for the taking. Sultan Suleiman I, he's defeated them, and Hungary is there for the taking. But he goes back. He installs a new king of Hungary and he goes back. Why? He realizes that the Ottoman Empire, we're not ready yet. Although we can take Hungary, we're not ready yet. The economic cost that will come to annex Hungary and make a part of our empire, the logistical nightmare, it's not now is not the time. That's another thing. He was really, really smart. Another lesson you can take from him is that he would think very, very carefully. It's not all about, let's just go and do everything and try and, conquer this land and that land. It's let's think what is best for us right now. If you can't do something, now is not the time to do it. We'll do it at a time when it is, maybe easier for us to do, is better for us to do. We don't have to do everything in one go. Step by step. We will get there. We will conquer Europe, but step by step. And he realized his weaknesses. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't a man to, he wasn't ashamed to say, you know what? Our empire isn't strong enough to go and annex Hungary into the Ottoman Empire. We will do that later. And so he installs a new king in Hungary, a pro-Ottoman king. He vassalizes it basically, meaning that they will pay taxes to the Ottomans. They won't attack the Ottomans. And so the objective, which was to stop the alliance with Austria, was achieved. And he goes back to Constantinople. And then 3 years later, he gets his army ready again. And 3 years later, he marches out of Constantinople once again. This time where? Vienna. Anyone know where Vienna is? Anyone heard of Vienna? Austria. Yeah, Austria. So in those days, it was the capital of the Austrian Empire. And like we said, Austria was the main sort of rival to the Ottomans, right? So now his target is to take Vienna. If I conquer Vienna, now the Austrians will be dealt with, and the rest of Europe is there for the taking. Because, England and France, they weren't very strong. They were fighting against each other. The armies they were fighting with were maybe 10, 20, 30,000 soldiers. Sultan Suleiman I, if he was to come with his cannons and hundreds of thousands of soldiers, there would be no match. Really, it was the Austrians that were the last group in his way before he conquers Europe. And so he goes to Vienna in 1529, again, with perhaps the most powerful Ottoman army ever assembled. He goes to Vienna to capture the city. He lays siege to it. But you see, the problem with Vienna, the way the walls are, it's very, very hard to try and firstly break those walls down because they're very, very strong. And secondly, to try and climb over the walls. If you want to take a city, obviously you climb over the walls and then you get down and you kill the soldiers that are there and the city is now yours, right? It was very hard to do that. And because of that, the defenses of Austria. Another thing is Constantinople to Vienna is very far away. It takes months to get from Constantinople to walk. Those days you don't have trains and cars or planes to get there very quickly, right? It takes very long. They had to walk down there. So, and there's something called a campaigning season, which we spoke about in some of the last lessons, that you don't go on a battle, on a war whenever you want, right? You don't, in the winter, it's not possible. You don't go and fight in a war in winter. It's cold, it's snowing, the conditions aren't there. There's going to be disease. Soldiers won't want to fight. It's going to be very muddy. So usually you go in springtime. Spring, autumn, summer, these are the best times. So usually they say from September, October time is the end. So sorry, it begins around February, March time, the campaigning season. And by October, November, you want to be done. No way, December, January, you don't want to be at war. So he marches out at the beginning of the campaigning season from Constantinople. By the time he gets to Vienna, it's nearly the end of the campaigning season because it takes so long and such a large army to get there. It takes very long to get there. So because of that, now the campaigning season is coming to an end. It's getting very cold. The defenses of Austria are not giving way. And at the same time, reinforcements are coming from Europe to help Vienna. Because Europe knows if Vienna falls, Europe will fall. So they're ready to help Vienna. So more and more soldiers are coming to help Vienna. And Sultan Suleiman I realizes that we can't stay here because if we try, our army will be destroyed. So he retreats back to Constantinople. But I wouldn't class this as a failure. Even though he wasn't able to achieve his objective of taking Vienna, what was the important message that was sent to Europe? That don't you dare try to commit treachery against us. Because look at how far our hand and our sword can extend. We're in Constantinople, but we can still reach you in Vienna. And we were very close to taking it. If you commit treachery against us again, we'll come with an even more powerful army. And maybe this time we'll be able to take it. So Europe, they had that element of fear. And that's what another thing that Sultan Suleiman I wanted to achieve. And really, it's here, Vienna, that marks the extent, the final part, the extent of Ottoman expansion into Europe. The Ottomans don't ever really go past Vienna. Another 100 years later or so, in the 1600s, Sultan Suleiman's descendants, his successors, they tried to take Vienna again, but they're unsuccessful once again. So Vienna, the Ottomans don't really go past it. That's the limit of Ottoman expansion into Europe. Now he's done with Europe. He's tied up the loose ends. Hungary is now his. Vienna, the Austrians know not to try and commit any treachery against him or fight him, so it's okay. Now he turns his attention to the east. In 1533, he gets his soldiers and he marches eastwards. Why does he go east? Who's in the east? So right next to the east is where you have Syria, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, these countries on the east of Turkey. Past that, the Ottomans control that. So past that is Iran, Iraq, those regions, what we call Persia or Mesopotamia. In those days, obviously, you don't call it Iran or Iraq. These are countries that came about afterwards, right? At that time, you call it Mesopotamia or Persia, yeah? And so who was ruling over that? The Shias, the Safavids. A Shia dynasty called the Safavid Empire. And they were ruling over that. Sultan Selim I, during his time, what the Safavids do is they try to make the Ottomans that were living in Turkey into Shias. So convert them into Shias and then rebel against the Ottomans. Sultan Selim I, he's no person to just sit by and say, oh, you're trying to meddle in my empire, keep doing it, it's fine. The minute he heard about this, he marched out with an army and he conquered the Safavids. Straight away. Didn't take him very long. And so for a while, the Safavids were very quiet. But now, about 20 years later, Safavids, they begin to cause problems again. They regroup and they begin to cause these rebellions again. They begin to get into clashes with Ottoman soldiers at the borders. So Sultan Suleiman I realizes there's problems in my eastern border. So he marches out with an army to go and deal with the Safavids. And he marches straight for, he doesn't care about anything else because he knows how powerful his army is. He goes straight for Tabriz, the capital of the Safavid Empire.